Hi everyone, I'm Roxana Saberi. Thanks for joining us. We're learning more information about the suspected gunman responsible for killing at least 26 people inside a church in Sutherland Springs, Texas this past Sunday morning. CBS News has obtained a 2012 police report from the El Paso Police Department. According to that report, Devin Kelley had escaped from a mental health facility in New Mexico and threatened his Air Force commanders while facing military charges of domestic violence. We also learned that Kelley had been caught sneaking firearms onto an airbase. That only raises more questions about how he was able to get hold of his weapons. Kelley was also court-martialed in 2012 for assaulting his wife and stepson. Air Force officials were required to enter the names of domestic abuse offenders into a national database that would prevent them from purchasing a firearm. But in Devin Kelley's case, that did not happen. Here with me is Heather Wilson, the 24th Secretary of the U.S. Air Force. Welcome, Secretary Wilson.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
This mental health facility that Kelley was at, he escaped from, had a program that was dedicated to military members and veterans. Did the Air Force send him there?
I actually have some restrictions, even though he is now dead. There are actually some restrictions on what I can say about his health status. And I've got to respect that, even in these awful circumstances.
So you're not able to say, even if you can confirm that he was at that mental health facility?
I have no reason to doubt the information that you have, but there are limitations on what I can say, and I'm sorry.
I understand. The police report that we received, and I have a copy of it here.
Yes.
I don't know if you've gotten to see it, but the El Paso police report was saying that Kelley was a danger to himself and others. He had been caught sneaking firearms onto Air Force Base. He was attempting to carry out death threats on his superiors. Was there a threat that he might actually carry out an attack on the Air Force Base?
He was convicted at a court-martial of domestic abuse against his wife and against his stepson, and put in prison for 12 months. So he was court-martialed for what he did to his own family.
So there wasn't a concern that maybe he might carry out an attack on the base where he was stationed?
I've got to be a little bit careful about the records I've seen, which is a little bit of an unusual position to be in. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you that he was court-martialed and convicted. He was clearly a serious problem in the Air Force, and was convicted of domestic violence against his wife and his child.
Now, given that the Air Force has said, and you have said, that the Air Force had failed to report that conviction to the federal authorities for them to put in the database on background checks, why did that happen? How did he fall through the cracks?
Well, that's why we've initiated the review of this case and all others like it, is to find out those facts.
What's supposed to happen in a case like this?
In a case like this, his fingerprints should be given to the Criminal Investigations Database, the national database, and that should have been done.
And is there a certain department within the Air Force that does that?
No, in this case, it is the local detachment of the Office of Special Investigations at the Air Force Base where he was assigned, at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico.
So as part of that review that you mentioned, I suppose those people will be...
We're doing a full review of this case and others like it, to ensure we're going through all of our databases to make sure that this wasn't the only case where this wasn't done. And so we're scrubbing all of our databases to see whether there's a systemic problem or whether this was an individual case.
Do you think there is a systemic problem? Do you think there are other cases? Do you know of any?
Well, that's why we're doing the review.
To find out more.
Yeah.
I see. I also wanted to ask you, in military courts, there is no such thing as a domestic violence charge or conviction. It falls under general assault. So if the rules were followed, the database wouldn't have worked to flag him as a domestic abuser and make him ineligible to buy a firearm. Is there a disconnect between the military and civilian justice systems?
We're going to find out what happened in this specific case, but it's pretty clear that the checklist that we use was not followed by the local office, and his fingerprints should have been put into the database, and they were not.
Let's turn to the Korean Peninsula, where President Trump is now visiting. The North, of course, remains a threat for the United States and North Korea. What role does the U.S. Air Force play in containing that threat?
The Air Force is, Our obligation is to stay ready and to support Secretary Tillerson and the President of the United States in their campaign, their pressure campaign and their diplomacy to try to resolve this. But the Air Force also stays ready to be able to defend the vital national interests of the United States at any time.
The president has said that various military options are on the table, including a preemptive first strike. Do you think that the Air Force and other military branches have the capability to eliminate North Korea's nuclear weapons from the air?
Well, the United States Air Force keeps a very strong capability for all kinds of contingencies, so that the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense have options. And our job is to stay ready. And one of the things that I'm very focused on is restoring the readiness of the force across the board. And that means having enough people, having the maintainers, and having the air crews to be able to do what the nation asks us to do.
What is the Air Force's capability? I don't know if you can say, about shooting down missiles that are at launch.
Well, the United States Air Force has satellite systems that monitor globally and look for launches of missiles. And so when they say that, well, North Korea launched another missile, it's the United States Air Force that detected that from space within minutes of it, actually it's probably seconds, but certainly minutes of its launch, to be able to tell where that's going, where the trajectory is. And that information is passed to the Missile Defense Agency. There are defensive missiles in both Alaska and on the coast of California to help to defend this country.
So in your estimation, do you think that the American people can feel safe in that if North Korea has a missile capable of carrying a nuclear weapon to the United States one day or now, that the U.S. Air Force would be able to help shoot that down?
We have some capability in Alaska and also in California. I believe the President of the United States today submitted a request for additional funding to strengthen missile defense for the United States. But anytime you're relying on missile defense in order to protect this country means it is the worst day in American history. And we need to try to make sure that someone would never have the ability or the intention and will to strike the United States of America.
So in addition to military options, then, are you proposing negotiations continue?
Absolutely, and our obligation is to try to stay so ready that no rational human being would want to take on the United States. And that's the purpose of our strength, is to serve as the foundation for Secretary Tillerson to negotiate.
Now, you mentioned President Trump making a request for more funding for the military. He actually asked Congress for $5.9 billion for the military yesterday. And he talked about how part of this would be aimed at containing the North Korean menace, what he called the North Korean menace. Do you feel that you have enough resources to make sure that America's national security interests are not degraded?
Well, our biggest challenge right now is, for the 9th year out of the last 10, we are operating under a continuing resolution. And the Budget Control Act, which is sometimes called sequester, is still the law of the land. So we need to lift the caps. We need to end the potential of sequester, so that we can protect this country. And it's time to kind of take this off of cruise control and put the Congress back at the steering wheel when it comes to the budget.
Now, turning to a slightly different issue, President Trump has been critical of the cost of F-35, and he's often touted the Navy planes. Do you think he has a point?
Well, the F-35, the cost of procuring the F-35 is actually going down as we increase the numbers that we're buying. We're also trying to drive down the cost of the maintenance and logistics to support them, and we will continue to try to cost-effectively modernize the force. I will tell you that the F-35 is another generation ahead of the F-18, and if it's me against you and you have an F-18 and I have an F-35, I win.
I hope I never have to go up against you. The Air Force is often at the forefront of innovation. What areas are you focusing on to make sure the U.S. stays that way?
One of the things that we're doing is recognizing that space is a contested domain now, and it wasn't before. And so we've requested a significant increase in funding to be able to defend our space assets from adversaries who I think recognize that it's one of our vulnerabilities. And so we're looking at significant changes to be aware of what's going on in space, to be able to take a punch and continue to fight through, so that whether it's the timing signal for the New York Stock Exchange or the blue dot on your phone or the ability to communicate, command and control our forces overseas, or to detect a missile launch, the United States Air Force has you covered.
Thank you, Secretary Wilson, for joining us.
Thank you.